The hammer rang against hot iron at the edge of the cavalry camp, and Calvin Fletcher did not look up when the soldiers started shouting. He had learned, in 3 years of following the Thornwall cavalry across the scorched borderlands, that soldiers shouted about everything: a dropped cup, a card game turned sour, a rumor about ration cuts. He kept his tongs steady and turned the shoe against the anvil, watching the color bleed from orange to dull red in the thin autumn air. The borderland smelled of char and turned earth tonight, the way they always did after a raid had swept through. 3 villages east of the camp had been hit by Asheville marauders a week ago. The cavalry was here to hold the line and had not held it particularly well, and everyone was on edge. The shouting grew pointed. Calvin set the shoe aside, straightened, and rolled his neck. He was not a large man. He stood a hand shorter than most of the cavalry troopers and carried his weight in his forearms and his shoulders rather than his chest. He had a quiet face, plain features, brown eyes, a jaw that had not seen a razor in 2 weeks because razors cost coin and coin was short. He was 29 years old and had been doing this work since he was 14, first as a farrier's apprentice in the market town of Redville and later as a traveling smith following whatever army or trade caravan would pay him. He was good at his work and invisible at everything else, which suited him well enough. What did not suit him was the shape he saw at the edge of the firelight. She was standing at the perimeter of the camp, very still, with 2 cavalry troopers leveling their spears at her from 10 feet away and Sergeant Darrow Vance doing his best to look imposing between them. She was taller than all 3 men, which was not unusual for an orc. What was unusual, what stopped Calvin's hand on his hammer, was that she was alone. Orcs, in Calvin's experience, did not wander into human cavalry camps alone, particularly not in borderland still smoldering from a raid. She wore travel-worn warrior's leathers, a fitted bodice of dark tan hide laced tight up the front over a close-cut long-sleeved undershirt of deep green, with snug-fitted riding trousers tucked into boots that came to her knee. The bodice was tooled in a pattern that Calvin could not read from this distance, something scrolling and deliberate, a clan mark of some kind. She had a short sword at her left hip and a hatchet at her right, and she had not reached for either of them, which Calvin thought showed considerable restraint given that 2 spears were pointed at her chest. Her skin was the gray-green of river slate after rain. Her hair was dark, almost black, pulled back from her face in a heavy braid that had come partially loose, strands falling across a jaw that was strong and clean, with the prominent lower canines that marked orc blood showing just slightly when her mouth pressed flat with something that looked very much like impatience. She was watching Sergeant Vance the way a hawk watches a pigeon, with perfect certainty that she could end the exchange whenever she chose to. "You do not have clearance to be within 50 yards of this camp," Vance was saying, his voice pitched loud enough to sound official. "State your business or move along." The orc woman said something Calvin could not hear clearly. He found himself walking toward the confrontation before he had consciously decided to do so, carrying his hammer loosely because he had forgotten to set it down. "I do not recognize your business," Vance said louder. "This is a Thornwall cavalry encampment. Unaffiliated persons of your kind are not permitted." "Then get me your commander," the woman said, and her voice was low and perfectly clear, accented with the clipped consonants of the Western Orc dialect, but her common was clean and exact. "I will wait. You'll wait outside the perimeter." "I am outside your perimeter. I have been outside your perimeter. I am standing on open ground." She tilted her head, a motion that was almost lazy. "The spears are unnecessary. If I had wanted to do harm, I would have done it from the tree line when your sentries crossed paths 20 minutes ago and left a gap large enough to ride a horse through." Vance went a color that was not quite red. Calvin stopped a few yards back and said, "Sergeant." "What's the situation?" Vance looked at him with barely contained irritation. "Fletcher, this doesn't concern the farrier." "No," Calvin agreed. But Lieutenant Ashbourne is going to want to know why you left a security gap, and you might want to sort out the cause of this particular problem before she finds out about the other one." He was not trying to embarrass Vance. He was genuinely offering the man an exit. Vance was not a bad soldier. He was just tired and frightened like everyone else in this camp, and frightened men with spears were the most dangerous kind of stupid. The orc woman's eyes moved to Calvin, just briefly. He felt the weight of them the way you feel a sudden warmth when a cloud passes and the sun breaks through. Vance lowered his hand slightly. "Right, fine. Fletcher, since you're so interested, you can escort her to the edge of camp while I send for the lieutenant. She waits there, not one step further." "That seems reasonable," the woman said, to no one in particular. Calvin turned and walked toward the southern perimeter stake, and he heard her fall into step behind him. He was very aware of how much larger she was, not in a way that frightened him. He had shot enough war horses to have lost his fear of large, powerful things. What he was aware of was that she moved with the particular quiet of someone who knew exactly how much noise they were choosing not to make. He stopped at the stake and turned. She stopped at a comfortable distance, arms loose at her sides. Up close she was striking in a way that caught in his chest like a burr. The firelight was making angles of her face, the broad cheekbones, the strong nose, those dark eyes that were taking him apart and putting him back together with professional detachment. She was perhaps 25. He was not certain. There was a scar above her left eyebrow, old and thin, and several newer marks on her forearms that were still healing. "You are not a soldier," she said. "Farrier," he said. "I shoe the horses." She looked at the hammer in his hand. He had forgotten again that he was carrying it. He considered putting it down and then decided that would look like he thought she was a threat. "My name is Mazoga Ashwalker," she said. "I have information for your commanding officer about the Asheville raiding party. 3 captains, 200 fighters, a second wave staged 3 days' ride east at the Hollow Ridge crossing. Your cavalry is planning to advance north. That advance will walk into the second wave." Calvin stared at her. "You should tell your commander that," he said. "I intend to," she said. "When your sergeant recovers his courage." A beat of silence. The fire crackled. Somewhere a horse stamped. "Why?" Calvin asked. She looked at him with a flicker of something that might have been surprise. "Why what? Why bring us the information? The Asheville aren't your clan." "No," she said, and something shifted in her expression, not pain exactly, but a flatness that covered something. "They are not." He did not push it. He knew a closed door when he saw one. Lieutenant Myra Ashbourne arrived in 7 minutes, which was faster than Calvin expected and suggested Vance had conveyed some urgency. Ashbourne was a compact, sharp-faced woman of 40 who had been commanding cavalry in the borderlands long enough that very little surprised her anymore. She looked at Mazoga for a long moment, took in the clan markings on her bodice and said, "Ashwalker clan." "Yes," Mazoga said. "You're a long way from your range." "Yes," Mazoga said again. Ashbourne asked questions for half an hour, direct and precise. Mazoga answered all of them without embellishment or hesitation. Calvin stood at the perimeter stake the entire time, because nobody had told him to leave, and because he found that he did not want to. He watched Mazoga's face as she gave troop positions, explained the terrain at Hollow Ridge, described the tactical weakness in the raiding party's formation during their retreat after the village raids. She spoke like someone who had been watching the Asheville for a long time, like someone with a reason. When Ashbourne finished, she said, "This will need verification. You understand that?" "I do," Mazoga said. "Send a fast scout to the eastern ridgeline before dawn. They will find the staging camp. And if they don't—" Mazoga met her eyes. "Then I will be wrong and you will have lost nothing but a scout's morning, but they will find it." Ashbourne studied her. "Where will you be in the morning?" "I will camp outside your perimeter tonight," Mazoga said. It was a statement, not a question, as though she had already decided. "You are welcome to take food from our supplies," Ashbourne said, which was as close to gratitude as the woman probably got. "Fletcher," Ashbourne looked at him. "You're camped on the south end." "Yes, Lieutenant." "See that she gets what she needs." And then Ashbourne was gone back toward the command tent, already calling for her senior scout. Calvin looked at Mazoga. "I have stew," he said, "and the fire's not bad." She looked at him for a long moment, then she said, "All right." His camp was separated from the main cavalry sprawl by 30 yards, which was deliberate, because horses and soldiers and forges were a bad combination at close quarters, and because Calvin Fletcher had always preferred a little space between himself and crowds. He had a lean-to of oiled canvas over a simple rope and post arrangement, a bedroll, his tools, and his forge. His fire was built properly, not too high, not too smoky, with good hardwood coals underneath. He had a pot of venison stew that he had made himself from the camp ration that morning, because the camp cook's stew was closer to flavored water than food. He poured a bowl and handed it to her. She took it without ceremony and ate standing up, looking out toward the dark tree line. He settled on the log he used as a seat near the forge and ate his own portion. They were quiet for a long time. "Do the horses trust you?" she asked. The question was so unexpected that he almost smiled. "Most of them. The new ones take a while. There's a bay stallion they brought in last week, cavalry reject, too aggressive, and I'm still working on him." "How do you do it?" he considered. "I don't fight them. I just keep showing up. Let them decide I'm not a threat." She looked at him then, and something in her expression was thoughtful, like she was filing that away. She left before he thought to ask her where she was camping. He tidied his fire, checked on the horses in the temporary picket line to his east, and went to sleep. He heard her the second night before he saw her. The borderland at night was not quiet. There were insects, distant wolves, the occasional cry of a night bird, but there was a particular absence of sound that followed a large predator, a held-breath quality to the air. Calvin was lying awake, which was usual for him these days. He slept badly in borderland camps, too aware of the risk, and had developed the habit of lying still and cataloging sounds. He heard that silence, and then he heard very soft footsteps on the north side of his lean-to. He did not move. He kept his breathing slow. The footsteps stopped. A long pause. Then they moved around the perimeter of his camp, slow and deliberate as though she was walking a circuit. He heard them stop again on the south side, nearest the tree line, and that was where they stayed. In the morning, there was a ring of boot prints in the soft earth around his camp. They were large and evenly spaced, and they circled the lean-to twice before stopping on the south side, where the ground showed the impression of someone sitting for a long while, back against a tree on the margin of the camp. She had spent a portion of the night on his perimeter, watching. He thought about that all day while he worked the bay stallion and reshod 3 cavalry mares. He thought about it while the scout came back from the eastern ridgeline white-faced and breathing hard and confirmed every single detail Mazoga had provided about the Asheville staging camp. He thought about it while Ashbourne called an emergency tactical meeting, and he, being a farrier and not a soldier, was not invited and simply continued his work. He thought about her sitting in the dark at the edge of his camp and did not try to explain it. He just let it settle. The third night he was ready. He built the fire higher. He made a proper meal, dried meat and hard bread, and a handful of the autumn herbs he'd gathered from the field margin at dusk, which made everything taste less like dust. He ate and waited, and around the second hour of full dark he heard the quality of the silence change. "I know you're there," he said, not loudly, to the south side of his camp. A pause, then, "I know you know." He looked toward the sound. She was at the margin of the firelight, half in shadow, leaning against the same tree as last night by the position of her voice. He could see the shape of her but not her face. "Come and eat something," he said. Another pause, longer. He didn't push it. She came into the firelight and sat on the far end of his log, a deliberate distance from him. She took the bread he offered and the portion of dried meat and ate with the careful economy of someone who had been running lean. "Your information was verified," he said. "I know," she said. "The scout came back this morning. Your lieutenant changed the advance route. You were watching the camp." "I was watching the area," she said, which was not quite a denial. "Mazoga." He had used her name before he thought about whether it was presumptuous. She glanced at him. "Why are you still here?" She chewed, swallowed, looked at the fire. The Asheville second wave will reposition when they realize the advance route has changed. They will move south, probably within 3 days. You could tell Ashbourne that. I did, this morning. So why are you still here? She was quiet for a long time. The fire shifted, spitting a brief column of sparks. I have been tracking the Asheville captain called Goreth Stonebeck for 4 months, she said, and her voice was level but carried something underneath it that was not level at all. He hit my clan's winter camp in the spring. We were a scouting family, my mother, 2 of my cousins, myself. Goreth's warband found us before we could reach the main camp. She stopped. He waited. I am the only one who came back from that. The fire cracked. I'm sorry, Calvin said, and meant it with the particular plainness of a man who knew sorry was not enough and said it anyway. She looked at him directly then, not with gratitude, with assessment. She was checking to see if he meant it. Goreth will follow the main Asheville group when they reposition, she said. He does not command independently. I need access to your cavalry's movement information so I can be in position when your forces engage. You want to go after him yourself? Yes. Does Ashbourne know this part? A beat. She knows I have a personal interest in the engagement. He thought about that. You've been sleeping outside this camp for 3 nights, he said. The cavalry perimeter is better defended than open ground, she said, as though this were obvious and not at all vulnerable. You could ask for a tent. I do not require a tent, she said, in a tone that suggested the offer of a tent was slightly offensive. He looked at her sitting on his log in the firelight, the half-loose braid, the careful distance she was keeping from him, the dried meat she was eating because she was hungry but had not asked. A woman who had spent 3 nights on the perimeter of a human cavalry camp because it was safer than the open, and had not asked for a single thing. He went asleep that night thinking about it. On the 4th morning, before he started his work, he unrolled his spare bedroll. He kept one because in borderland work the first one usually got wet, and carried it to the south side of his camp, to the tree where her print stopped. He laid it flat against the base of the tree with the oilskin side down and the wool side up. He weighted one corner with a smooth stone so the wind wouldn't take it. He went back to his forge and started work on a cavalry mare's left rear shoe that had been giving him trouble. An hour later he heard her behind him. He did not turn around. "This is yours," Mazoga said. "I have another one," he said. "I do not need, it's cold," he said simply. "The ground is cold, take the bedroll." A long silence. He worked the iron. "I do not understand you," she said. "I know," he said. "That's all right." He heard her pick it up. He turned then because he couldn't help it. She was holding the bedroll against her chest, looking at him with an expression he had not seen on her face before, open and uncertain, and something else underneath that he wasn't ready to name yet. Her dark eyes were catching the early light. "You are a strange man, Calvin Fletcher," she said. "Probably," he agreed. She carried the bedroll south into the tree line, and he turned back to his work with his heart doing something it had not done in a very long time. That was the beginning. She was back before midday. She appeared at the edge of his workspace without announcement, which he was beginning to understand was her way, and said, "The bay stallion." He looked up. The stallion was in the travel picket, ears flat, ignoring everyone who came near him. "What about him?" "He is not aggressive," she said. "He is frightened." "Look at his right shoulder." Calvin looked. He had been working around the horse's head and near feet, managing the animal's distrust, and he had not looked carefully at the right shoulder. He crossed to the picket and came around the horse's flank carefully, and he saw it, a thin raised scar that wrapped from the point of shoulder to mid-barrel, old but significant. Something had laid the horse open at speed. A spear butt maybe, or a lance in some previous action. "He has been hit from the right," Mazoga said. She was standing on the far side of the picket fence now, not in the horse's space. When people approach from his right, he reacts. Calvin stood back and watched. The nearest soldier was approaching from the horse's left side, and the stallion was tense but not lashing. Another trooper cut past on the right without thinking, and the horse threw his head and pulled against the rope. "That's it," Calvin said quietly. "Approach from the left," Mazoga said, "for now. Give him time to trust the approach before you try the right side, maybe 2 weeks. You know horses." My clan ranges across open country. We have always used horses. She said it without pride, just as fact. Calvin studied her over the stallion's back. She was standing with her arms resting on the top rail of the fence, completely relaxed, and the horse had noticed her and was not alarmed. The horse was reading her stillness and deciding she was safe. "Come around the left," he said. "Come into the paddock slowly." She did without hesitation, swinging over the rail with an easy grace that made it look effortless, and she stood 4 feet from the stallion's shoulder and did absolutely nothing, just breathed. The horse rolled an eye at her. His ears came forward a fraction. They stood there for 5 minutes, Calvin watching her, Mazoga watching the horse deciding. Then the stallion put his nose out and touched her hand. Calvin felt something give in his chest like a rusted hinge, finally moving. 2 weeks, Mazoga said softly, not looking at Calvin, her hand now resting very lightly on the stallion's nose. But probably less. The Asheville second wave repositioned faster than Mazoga had predicted, not 3 days but 2, driven south by the cavalry's changed advance route pressing them from the north. They swept wide of the main borderland road and hit the supply trail instead. Calvin found out about this because he was on the supply trail. It was not his choice to be there. Ashbourne had called for the supply run 2 days ago, grain for the horses, replacement arrows, medical supplies, and had sent a detail of 8 cavalry troopers with 2 wagons to collect the depot delivery at the border post of Thorngate. Calvin had been sent along because 3 cavalry horses in the detail had shoeing issues that could go bad on the 3-day ride, and because Ashbourne trusted him with animals even if she forgot to trust him with information. They were a day out from Thorngate on the return leg when the trees on both sides of the trail erupted. Calvin's first response was entirely unprofessional. He grabbed the traces of the lead wagon horse, a gray gelding who was starting to panic, with both hands and said, "Easy, easy, easy," with the particular flat calm he used on frightened animals, because if the horse went down it would wreck the wagon and spill the grain, and then everything Ashbourne needed would be scattered across a hostile trail. Around him the cavalry troopers were forming up, spears out. There were a lot of Asheville fighters. He did not count because he was watching the gray gelding, and they had hit from both sides, which meant the troopers were split on instinct, 4 to each side, which was wrong. He could see it was wrong, but he was a farrier and not a soldier. The gray gelding was heaving under his hands. "Right here," Calvin said to the horse. "Right here, I've got you." He heard the fighting sounds, metal, impact, shouting, and kept his eyes on the gray and did not let go. And then from the southern tree line, behind the Asheville fighters, came something that Calvin would spend a long time trying to describe accurately and never quite manage. Mazoga came out of the trees at a dead run with her short sword in one hand and the hatchet in the other, and she moved through the Asheville rear flank with a speed and precision that did not seem connected to anything as slow as fighting. She was cutting through their formation before they registered her presence, and the 3 fighters at the rear went down in as many seconds. The Asheville fighters facing the cavalry suddenly had a very loud, very fast problem behind them. The cavalry troopers were experienced enough to recognize a flanking opportunity when it literally ran through the enemy's back. They pressed hard. The engagement lasted 7 more minutes. When it was over, 4 of the Asheville fighters had surrendered and the rest had fled north into the trees. 3 cavalry troopers had injuries, none life-threatening. Calvin had a bruised shoulder from where the gray gelding had lunged and caught him with his head, and the gray had a shallow cut on his near hind from flying debris. Mazoga was standing at the edge of the trail, breathing hard, watching the tree line. She had a cut along her left forearm, new, not deep, and blood on her hands and leathers. When Calvin walked toward her, she turned and looked at him with an intensity that was almost physical. "The wagons," she said. "Both intact," he said. "The gray caught some debris. I need to look at his leg." She looked at his shoulder. The way she looked at it was thorough and specific, a quick inventory. "Your shoulder." I've had worse from horses, he said. She was still looking at him. The intensity had not diminished. You held the horse, she said. Yes. In the middle of the ambush. The grain and supplies can't get home if the wagon goes over, he said practically. Ashbourne needs those supplies. Mazoga stared at him for 3 full seconds. Then she said, You are the most sensible person in this entire cavalcade. And there was something raw in her voice that didn't match the words, something warm pushing up under the practicality. He went to the gray gelding. She followed and stood at the horse's head the way she had with the stallion, still and steady, so Calvin could examine the leg without the horse moving. The cut was shallow and clean. He had supplies in the wagon, had packed them himself as a matter of habit. He had learned not to trust other people to pack what he needed. He cleaned and wrapped the leg with Mazoga holding the gelding's head, and the gray stood quiet for her. They were on the trail again within the hour. That night, camped on the trail, she settled near his fire without being asked. One of the cavalry troopers, a young man named Holt with a bandaged arm, watched her across the fire with a complicated expression. She's on our side, Calvin said to Holt, quietly and without judgment. Holt looked at him. Then he looked at Mazoga. Then he looked back at his food. Mazoga heard. She said nothing, but Calvin caught the slight change in the set of her jaw. Not hurt. Something more complicated than hurt. Something she had been carrying long enough that it no longer surprised her. He moved his bedroll closer to hers that night, not touching distance, just closer. She looked at the shift and then looked at him. I sleep light, he said. If anything comes out of the trees, you'll hear me wake up. She looked at him for a long time in the fire-dimmed dark. You are doing this so I do not have to be the only one watching, she said quietly. Yes, he said, and lay down and pulled his blanket up and closed his eyes. A pause. Then he heard her settle. He slept better that night than he had in 3 weeks. They reached camp the following evening, and Ashbourne met them at the edge of camp with the specific expression of a commanding officer who has been informed about an ambush and has opinions about it. She looked at the wagons, both intact, supplies complete, and something in her face loosened fractionally. She looked at Mazoga. You were on the trail. Yes, Mazoga said. Fletcher, Ashbourne said. Your report. Calvin gave it, clean and without embellishment. The ambush position, the Asheville numbers, Mazoga's flanking action, the troopers' engagement, the captures, and the retreat. Ashbourne listened with her hands clasped behind her back. Ashwalker, Ashbourne said when he finished. You have my official thanks. We would have lost those wagons without the rear action. Perhaps, Mazoga said. Not perhaps. Ashbourne's voice was blunt but genuine. This campaign does not work without this supply run. You saved it. A pause. Is there something you require from this command? Mazoga was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Information. When your forces engage the Asheville main group, I want to know the timing. For Gorath Stonebeck. Yes. Ashbourne looked at her with a direct, measuring quality. Stonebeck is not a sanctioned target. He is mine, Mazoga said, and her voice was perfectly still. Another pause. Ashbourne said, I will not sanction what I do not know about, and I will not know things that are not brought to my official attention. She held Mazoga's gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Is that clear? Very clear, Mazoga said. Ashbourne walked away. Calvin stood beside Mazoga in the camp's edge dust and watched her go. She just told you she'll look the other way, he said. I know what she told me, Mazoga said. He turned to her. In the last light she looked tired in a way she had not let herself look before, not physically. She was clearly made of something tougher than most people, but around the eyes. A tiredness that was older than this week or this borderland or this campaign. When is the engagement? He asked. 3 days, she said. Possibly 4. He nodded. Come and eat. She came. He cooked because he always cooked. He had learned early that the quality of your food in a borderland camp was entirely a function of whether you were willing to do it yourself. And they ate sitting on his log by the forge, which was cold now and warm in the morning. The stallion, 3 picket posts away, was watching Mazoga. His ears were forward. He remembers you, Calvin said. Mazoga looked at the horse. They always do, she said without vanity. "You're good with frightened things," he said. She looked at him then. Something in the look asked a question he had not quite asked yet. "People too," he said very carefully. A pause. The fire was low. The camp's sounds had settled. "Calvin," she said, and the way she said his given name, she had not used it before, she had not called him anything, hit him somewhere around the sternum. "Yes." "Why did you put the bedroll there for me?" She was looking at the fire. "You did not know me. You had no obligation. I was a stranger and an orc, and I had given you no reason to expect. You were sitting on cold ground," he said. "Outside a strange camp in the borderlands, alone." He paused. "That's enough of a reason." She was quiet. "You have been hunting this man for 4 months," he said. "Alone. You gave us information that could have gotten you killed if we'd been the wrong kind of command and decided you were a spy. You fought on a trail you had no obligation to be on. He stopped, started again. "Mazoga, you don't have to earn the right to a warm place to sleep." She turned her head and looked at him, and what was in her face was not the assessment he was used to. It was something exposed and steady at the same time. He felt the weight of it again, that warmth he'd first felt when she looked at him at the perimeter stake. "My clan," she said quietly. "We have a word, karathu. It means the one you recognize, when you meet a person and the recognition is immediate, not desire, not admiration, recognition." She paused. "I am not a person who uses that word casually." Calvin did not move. He was very aware of the firelight and the distance between them on the log and the sound of the horse's quiet breathing. "Mazoga," he said. "You should understand what that means," she said, still looking at him, "before I say it. Tell me what it means." She turned to face him fully. The firelight was making amber of her gray-green skin, and her dark eyes were very direct. "It means I see you, not what you do, not your usefulness. A pause. "It is not a small thing." "No," he said, "it doesn't sound like it. In my people's custom, when a woman calls someone karathu, she is claiming him. She is saying, this one is mine to protect and I am his." She watched him carefully. "I am telling you this before I say it, because you deserve to know what you are agreeing to or refusing." Calvin Fletcher, who had been a farrier for 15 years and had followed cavalry across 3 borderland campaigns and had slept alone on cold ground in more camps than he could count, looked at Mazoga Ashwalker and felt something in himself go very quiet. "Say it," he said. She held his gaze. "Karathu," she said, and the word in her language was low and warm and precise, and it landed on him like a brand, not painful but permanent. He reached across the space between them and took her hand. She looked at their joined hands. Her fingers were longer than his, stronger. She turned her hand over and held his back. "I don't have a word that means the same thing," he said. "But I think I've been feeling it since the perimeter stake." Something in her face that had been held carefully in place for a very long time came loose. Not dramatically, she was not a dramatic person, just a softening, a permission she was giving herself. He leaned forward and kissed her. It was a careful kiss, because he was a careful man, but she put her free hand against the side of his face and held him there. And the kiss became something less careful, warm and searching, both of them moving closer on the log until there was no longer any deliberate distance between them. He smelled of wood smoke and travel and something green, like early grass in good soil, and he lost track of time. When they broke apart, she was looking at him from very close, and her expression was open in a way that he suspected almost no one ever got to see. "You are not what I expected," she said quietly. "What did you expect?" "I expected to be afraid of you," she said, "of what you might think of me or what you might do." "I'm just a farrier," he said. "No," she said, "you are karathu." She said it like it settled everything, and somehow it did. They sat by the fire for a long time after that, not always talking, and when she finally moved to her bedroll, she touched his shoulder as she passed. He lay awake for a while with his hand pressed over the place she'd touched and felt, for the first time in a long time, not alone. 2 days before the projected Thornwall engagement with the Asheville Maine group, Sergeant Vance decided to make himself a problem. He had been making small problems since the supply run came back, loudly expressing his discomfort with the presence of an orc in the camp. avoiding Mazoga's end of the camp, making comments to other troopers that were not quite loud enough to constitute an official complaint. Calvin had been aware of it and had said nothing, because it was not his place, and because Mazoga clearly did not need him to fight her battles. But on the morning 2 days before the engagement, Vance apparently decided that proximity to danger made formality optional. Calvin heard Mazoga's voice and Vance's voice from the direction of the command area and turned from the anvil to look. Vance was standing in the open space between the main camp and the farrier's corner, with 2 other troopers flanking him, not overtly aggressive, but positioned. Mazoga was facing him alone, her arms loose, her expression carrying the specific quality of a person who had decided exactly how this encounter was going to go and was simply waiting for Vance to finish. "We don't have official confirmation of your status," Vance was saying, louder than necessary. "For all we know, you're running intelligence for them. You show up out of nowhere, give us information that conveniently positions our cavalry. My information changed your advance route and saved this command from engaging a larger force at a strategic disadvantage," Mazoga said with absolute calm. "Your own scout confirmed my report. Scouts can be wrong, he was not wrong. You were on a restricted supply trail. I fought on that trail on behalf of your cavalcade. 8 of your troopers and 2 wagons came back intact. If you would like to present the alternative outcome for comparison, I am listening." Vance's jaw worked. He was not a stupid man. He knew he was losing the argument, but he was a frightened man in a borderland with an orc in his camp, and fear made people reach for whatever they could find. He looked past Mazoga toward Calvin, and his eyes narrowed. "Fletcher," he said, "you've been keeping company with her. Do you know anything about her loyalties? Calvin set down his hammer. He walked across the open space and stood beside Mazoga. He was aware of the eyes of the camp troopers who had wandered close, attracted by the elevated voices. He was aware of being smaller than almost everyone present. He was aware of Mazoga watching him from the corner of her eye with an expression that was very carefully neutral. "I know she warned this command about a second-wave attack," Calvin said, addressing Vance directly and without heat. "I know she confirmed troop positions accurately. I know she fought on the supply trail without being asked and got your grain back to camp. And I know you're standing here trying to relitigate a decision your commanding officer already made." He paused. "If you have a security concern, it goes to Lieutenant Ashbourne. That's the process. Anything else is just noise, Sergeant." Vance looked at him. The 2 flanking troopers looked at each other. From the direction of the command tent, Ashbourne's voice cut clean across the camp. "Vance, my tent." Now she had clearly been watching. Vance's jaw tight. He turned and walked away. The troopers drifted. The crowd dissolved. Calvin let out a slow breath. Mazoga turned to look at him. Her expression was not grateful exactly, something more complex than that. "You did not have to do that," she said quietly. "I know. He could make trouble for you. He's a sergeant and I'm a civilian contractor. He can make noise, that's about it." Calvin picked up his hammer again, and besides, it needed saying. She was quiet for a moment. Then she moved to stand closer to him, close enough that their arms nearly touched, and she looked out at the camp the way she looked at the tree line, steady and present. "In my clan's custom," she said, "when a man stands for a woman in public, it has a meaning." He looked at her. "What meaning?" "That he is willing to be counted as hers," a pause, "and she as his." Something warm moved through him. He looked back at his work. "I was already counted as yours," he said, "since 2 nights ago." A pause. Then she touched the back of his hand briefly, just the tips of her fingers against his knuckles, and went back to her post. He spent the rest of the morning working the iron with a steadiness that surprised him. That evening she taught him to say Karathu correctly, because the first time he tried it he put the stress wrong, and she made an expression that might have been amusement, the first real one he'd seen on her. "Again," she said. "Karathu," he said, "better this time." "Better," she allowed. "Is there a response? A word that means the same going back?" She thought about it. "Karathu is not directional," she said. "It is not I claim you or you claim me. It is I see you as mine and I am yours. It works in both directions at once. So I can say it to you, she looked at him. Yes. Karathu, he said, looking at her. She was quiet for a moment, and something in her face was very still with something that was not stillness at all. Say it again, she said quietly. Karathu Mazoga Ashwalker. She looked at him for a long time, and then she said it back, and in her voice it sounded like a vow. The night before the engagement, Ashbourne called a final briefing. Mazoga attended, which was now normal enough that only 2 people looked twice. Calvin attended because Ashbourne apparently included him in final briefings now, which was not normal at all, and he suspected it had more to do with Mazoga's presence than with his farrier expertise. We engaged the Asheville main group at first light, Ashbourne said. They've positioned on the North Ridge. Our advantage is the valley approach. The Asheville Captain Goreth Stonebeck is believed to be commanding the eastern flank. She did not look at Mazoga when she said this, and very deliberately did not look at Mazoga, which was itself a kind of communication. After the briefing, outside the command tent, Mazoga stood for a moment in the dark, and Calvin stood beside her. Eastern flank, he said. Yes, she said. Are you telling me your plan, or are you going alone? She turned to look at him. In the dark her eyes caught what little light there was. I am going alone. This is not your fight. I know that, he said. That's not what I asked. A pause. I will go around the south side of the ridge. There is a dry creek bed that comes up behind the Asheville position. During the engagement, when Goreth's attention is on the valley, I will have him. And after. She understood what he meant. After I will come back, she said. How will I know you're safe? I will come back, she said again, more directly this time. Calvin, I am telling you I will come back. He looked at her. I believe you, he said. I just want to know the difference between you coming back and me needing to go find you. Something in her face shifted. She stared at him. You would come find me? Yes. In hostile territory? Yes, Mazoga. She stared at him for 3 full seconds with an expression he could not entirely read, and then she put her hands on either side of his face and kissed him, fierce and unhurried all at once, her thumbs along his jaw, his hands finding her wrists to hold on. She pulled back and looked at him from close range. If I am not back by midday, send word east along the creek bed, she said. Midday, he confirmed. I will be back before midday. I know, he said. She held his gaze another moment. Then she turned and walked toward the tree line, and he watched her until the dark took her. He did not sleep. He worked instead because the cavalry needed their horses ready at dawn, and he was not going to fail at the one thing he was actually here to do. He checked every shoe on every cavalry horse in the picket. He checked the gray gelding's bandaged leg. He checked the bay stallion, who was calm under his hands in a way he had not been a week ago, and he thought about what Mazoga had said about approaching from the left and giving things time. At first light, the cavalry moved out. He watched them go from the perimeter of the farrier's corner, the column of horses, the clank of equipment, Ashbourne at the front with her jaw set, Vance somewhere in the middle. The camp went quiet. He waited. The engagement sound started at mid-morning distant, carrying over the ridge on the still autumn air. Metal and shouting, the particular sharp sound of command horns. He tightened a bolt on the forge that did not need tightening and then stopped and simply sat down on his log and listened. At around the late morning the sounds changed, less edge in them, winding down rather than intensifying. Midday came. He had told himself he would wait until midday before sending word along the creek bed, but he had also told himself he would be honest with himself, and he was watching the tree line from the moment the engagement sound softened, and his heart was doing something unreasonable every minute she did not appear. At perhaps a quarter past midday, he heard footsteps in the tree line and his whole body tensed. Then the footsteps resolved into her shape at the margin of the trees, and he got to his feet. She was limping. Not badly, not the kind of limp that meant something was broken, but a favoring of her right leg that she was trying not to show. She had a cut on her cheek, a split lip that was already purpling, and blood on her leathers that was not entirely her own. She carried her short sword and her hatchet, and she held her head exactly as she always did. When she came into the camp, she stopped and looked at him and said, "I am back." He crossed to her in 4 strides and put his hands on her face, checking the cut on her cheek, the split lip, and she let him, which told him more about how she was feeling than anything she could have said. "The leg," he said, "twisted when I came down the creek bed," she said. "Not broken, I have had worse." "I know, come and sit." She sat. He cleaned the cut on her cheek. It was not deep. It would not scar. And then he looked at her leg and decided the twist was real but not serious and wrapped it in the clean linen he kept for horse injuries, which she made a comment about that made him smile briefly. "Gorath," he said when he had finished. "Done," she said. She said it the way you say a thing that has cost you something but that you have no regrets about. Flat and final and with a weight underneath that he would not pick at. He sat beside her on the log, close. She leaned against his shoulder, which was something she had not done before. She had always maintained a careful posture, upright and self-contained. The weight of her against him was warm and solid, and he felt the tiredness in it. He put his arm around her. She let out a breath that had been held for a long time. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "I will be," she said. "That's not what I asked." A long pause. "It is hard," she said, "to finish a hunt that has taken 4 months. The anger has been holding me up. When it is done, there is nothing under it for a while." "There's something under it," he said. She lifted her head and looked at him. "There's the rest of everything," he said. There's what comes next." She looked at him for a moment. "What does come next?" "I don't know," he said honestly. "But we can figure that out." The cavalry came back at mid-afternoon. The engagement successfully concluded, the Asheville, Maine group broken, their command structure disrupted by the loss of their eastern flank captain. The borderland raid threat effectively ended for this season. Ashbourne was satisfied. Vance was professionally silent on the subject of any unauthorized individuals in the vicinity of the eastern flank. That evening, Ashbourne came to the farrier's corner. She looked at Mazoga, sitting beside Calvin on his log with her wrapped leg out in front of her, and she looked at Calvin, and her expression carried a complicated sort of approval that she did not put into explicit words. "The command is pulling back to Thorngate in 3 days," she said. "The borderland is stable enough for the winter. What are your plans, Ashwalker?" Mazoga was quiet a moment. She looked at Calvin. He looked back at her. "Undecided," Mazoga said. "Fletcher," Ashbourne said, "I am going to request your continued contract through the winter post at Thorngate. The garrison keeps horses and needs a farrier. The posting pays better than campaign rates and the lodging is fixed, if you want it." Calvin had followed cavalry campaigns for 3 years and had not stayed in a fixed posting in any of them, partly because none had been offered and partly because he had never had a reason to stop moving. He looked at Mazoga. "Is Thorngate on your range?" he asked her. She studied him. "Are you asking me to stay?" "I'm asking if Thorngate works for you," he said carefully. "I'm staying if you're staying, that's just the fact of it." Mazoga held his gaze for several seconds. Ashbourne, to her credit, simply waited. "Thorngate is on the edge of the Ashwalker clan's southern range," Mazoga said to Ashbourne and to Calvin both. "I have not been back to my clan since the spring. I have some things she paused, to put to rest and to report, but Thorngate is a reasonable base." "Then yes," Calvin said to Ashbourne, "I'll take the posting." Ashbourne gave a single nod. 3 days, she said, and walked away. In the dark, after the camp had mostly quieted, Mazoga said, "You did not ask me, you informed me." "I didn't want you to feel like you had to make a decision for my sake," he said, "so I made my decision and left yours separate. And if I had chosen to go somewhere else," he thought about that, "I would have asked if there was a posting with horses near wherever you were going." She stared at him. Then something broke open in her face, not dramatically, but unmistakably warmth, real and unguarded, the kind of expression that meant the careful walls had come down because she had decided they were no longer necessary. She kissed him again, and this time there was no urgency in it, just steadiness. She tasted of the dried figs he'd found in the supply wagon and the clean, cold air and something that was entirely her own. "Karathu," she said against his mouth. "Karathu," he said back. The 3-day march to Thorngate was better than the supply run had been, because they were not under pressure and the Asheville threat had dissolved, and because Calvin was riding the gray gelding, who was sound on his repaired leg, and Mazoga was riding the bay stallion, who had apparently decided in the last several days that Mazoga Ashwalker was the single most trustworthy being on the borderland and was behaving accordingly. Watching her on the stallion was something Calvin found he could not quite look away from. She rode with the easy authority of someone who had spent a childhood in the saddle, and the stallion moved under her with the particular looseness of an animal that has finally stopped being afraid. They were working each other out, the horse and the orc woman, finding the language between them. Vance kept to the far side of the column. He had said nothing further to either of them. Calvin thought that was probably the best outcome available. Holt, the young trooper with the bandaged arm, caught up to Calvin on the second day of the march and said, somewhat awkwardly, "She saved us on the supply trail." "Yes," Calvin said. "I didn't say thank you." "She's not far ahead," Calvin said. Holt kicked his horse forward. Calvin watched him catch up with Mazoga, say something, and watched Mazoga turn to look at him with that measuring expression before she gave a single nod that clearly constituted acceptance of the thanks. Holt fell back looking relieved. Calvin filed that away with the other things he was learning about her, that she accepted genuine things when they were offered plainly, that she was not interested in performance, that she was fair. Thorngate was a walled market town that had been a military post before the border wars and still maintained a cavalry garrison. 200 soldiers through the winter, enough to make the posting significant. It had a proper blacksmith's yard inside the garrison wall, a stable that could hold 40 horses, a hay loft, and lodging for the garrison's attached civilians in a row of stone-built rooms along the inner wall. Calvin's room was small, a bed, a trunk, a window that looked into the stable yard, and it was the best room he had lived in since Redville. He stood in the middle of it after the column arrived and took stock of the stone walls and the clean straw smell drifting from the stable and the actual wooden door with an actual iron latch, and thought that he could work here. Mazoga appeared in his doorway 3 hours after he'd moved in. She was still in her leathers. She had not changed. She had been helping settle the horses, and she had a look that was more tentative than he was used to seeing from her. "I need to go to my clan," she said, "before winter settles the passes, 3, maybe 4 days' ride." "I know," he said. "I've been thinking about that." "I will come back," she said. "I know you will," he said. He did know it. That was the strange thing. He had known very few certainties in his adult life, and this was one of them. "It may be," she hesitated. "It may be complicated, returning. What happened in the spring," she stopped. He crossed the room and took her hands. She looked down at their joined hands. "You lost people," he said, "and you spent 4 months doing the thing you could do about it, and now you have to go back and tell them." He paused. "That's hard, but you know how to do hard things." "I have not told them about you," she said. "That's all right." "Calvin," she looked up at him, "my clan elders will have opinions. The Ashwalker clan has had," she searched for the word, "fraught dealings with the Thornwall cavalry in the past and with humans generally." "I know," he said. "That's fair. So do most humans with orcs. If I name you to my clan, name me," he said simply. She studied him. "You do not know what that involves. Tell me." "If I bring you before the elders as Karathu, they will want to assess you, question you, possibly, a slight pause, test you in some form." He thought about that. "I can be assessed," he said. "The last human to present before Ashwalker elders was 2 generations back," she said. "I do not know how that went." "Well," he said, "I guess we'll find out." She stared at him. "You are willing to present before my elders." "Mazoga," he said. "You stood at the perimeter stake of a human cavalry camp and gave information that could have gotten you killed. You slept on cold ground to keep that camp safe. You fought on a supply trail for 8 people you didn't know. I can sit in front of some elders and be asked questions." He held her gaze. "Besides, I want to meet the people who made you." Something happened in her face that he was going to think about for a long time afterward. A fullness, like a word said in a language you have almost forgotten but suddenly remember perfectly. She stepped forward and put her arms around him, which she had not done before. A full embrace, and her chin came down to rest on the top of his head because she was taller than him, and he put his arms around her and felt the solidness of her, the warmth, the realness. 4 days, she said against his hair. Prepare for 4 days. I'll get a leave from Ashbourne, he said. She will give it, Mazoga said confidently. She was right. Ashbourne gave it without significant comment, which Calvin was beginning to understand meant approval. He had never ridden into Orc clan territory before. He had ridden past Orc territories, beside them, around the edges of them, because cavalry campaigns had a habit of grazing the borders of things. But riding into the Ashwalker Winter Range, a high-plateau country of thin silver birch and frost-hardened grass and huge flat stones that caught the pale autumn sun, was a different thing entirely. It felt older than the borderland, more itself. Mazoga was different here, not looser exactly, more settled. As though the land was speaking a language she had been translating for weeks and could now simply hear directly. The winter camp was not large, perhaps 60 people, if Calvin counted the shapes moving between the hide tents. Large tents, beautifully made with clan markings on the hides. Cook fires, a central gathering space, horses on a picket at the north end. Children who stopped and stared at the human on the gray gelding with enormous, unabashed curiosity. The elders were 3. An old woman with white hair cropped close to her head who was introduced as Elder Sharath, a man of perhaps 60 with elaborate forearm markings who was Elder Kavesh, and a woman who might have been 40 who held herself like a soldier and said nothing while Sharath and Kavesh spoke. The silent woman was the one Calvin decided to be most careful about. The assessment was thorough and not unkind. Sharath asked him questions about his work, his trade, where he had trained, the campaigns he had followed, and seemed genuinely interested in the answers in the way of someone who values competence in any form. Kavesh asked about his intentions toward Mazoga, directly and without any apparent embarrassment at the directness, and Calvin answered equally directly. He said he intended to be where Mazoga was, to be counted as hers, to earn the clan's respect through conduct over time rather than claims. The silent woman, whose name he learned later was Rashka, the Ashwalker war leader, waited until Sharath and Kavesh had finished, and then she looked at Calvin and said, "Show me your hands." He held them out. They were a farrier's hands, calloused, scarred, strong in the forearms. Rashka looked at them for a long time. Then she looked at Mazoga. Something passed between them in the silence. "He has worked hard," Rashka said. "Not soldier's work, craftsman's work." Another pause. "That is its own kind of value." Mazoga said nothing, but Calvin felt her stillness beside him shift fractionally, the way the stallion's ears had moved forward when he'd finally decided the Orc woman was safe. Elder Sharath asked Calvin to wait outside the tent while the 3 elders spoke with Mazoga. He went and stood in the thin autumn sunlight beside the gray gelding, and the children came closer, 3 of them now, watching him with the open fascination of young things who have not yet learned to pretend not to look. He thought about Mazoga inside the tent, telling them about the spring, about the 4 months, about what she had finished. He thought about Karathu. Rashka came out first. She stood beside Calvin for a moment and looked at the horizon. "She has named you," Rashka said. "I know," he said. "The clan will not oppose it," Rashka said. "But you should know she was different before the spring, softer. What she became on that hunt," Rashka stopped. "She will not come entirely back from that, but I have watched her since she arrived, and she is already different than she was yesterday." "She is," Calvin said, and meant it. Rashka looked at him, not assessing now, just looking. "We do not give our people to humans often," she said. "I know," he said. "I'll be worth it." A pause. Then Rashka said, "See that you are," and walked back into the tent. He was. The winter at Thorngate was the most settled period of Calvin Fletcher's adult life. He had a fixed posting, a stone-walled room, a proper forge, 40 horses to look after, and Mazoga. She was not always in Thorngate. She ranged between the garrison and the Ashwalker winter camp, carrying information and maintaining the thread of contact that she had begun with Ashbourne, which was turning quietly, and without any official announcement, into a formal intelligence relationship that benefited everyone who did not announce it formally. She was on the road 3 or 4 days at a stretch, and he worked and waited. And when she returned, she came to his room and he had food ready because that was just who he was. And they sat by the small hearth, and she told him about the roads and he told her about the horses. The bay stallion, now named by the cavalry as Ironwood at Mazoga's suggestion, had become the garrison's finest horse. He went under any rider now, as long as they approached from the left first, and his speed had been clocked as exceptional. The garrison commander wanted to breed him. Calvin was managing that conversation. He had a dream one night that was not quite a dream, the half-awake state in which you process things, in which he understood with complete clarity that he was happy. Not a complicated happiness, just the plain, daily kind. The kind that is built out of work and fire and food and someone coming back. She came back from a 5-day ride to the clan camp in early winter, later than expected, and he was at the garrison gate when she rode in on the horse she'd borrowed, not Ironwood. Ironwood stayed in the garrison, and he could see from 30 yards that something had happened. He opened the gate himself. The gate guard knew him well enough by now to let him manage Mazoga's arrivals, and took the horse's bridle while she dismounted. She handed him the reins and then stood for a moment with her hand on the horse's neck, not looking at him, which was how he knew it was something she was working out how to say. "Rashka," she said, "the war leader. She's stepping back from the roll, her health." A pause. "She wants me to take it." Calvin was very still. "War leader," he said. "I would be based from the clan camp," she said. "The range would be mine to oversee. Thorngate would be—" She stopped. "It would be difficult to maintain." He looked at her. She was still not looking at him, still facing the horse, and he could see the line of tension in her shoulders. "Mazoga," he said, "look at me." She turned. Her expression was the most unguarded he had ever seen it. Fear, yes, but the specific fear of someone who has found something they value and is terrified of losing it. "Is this what you want?" he asked. She stopped. "I have always another stop. The Ashwalker war leader was my mother's role, before the spring." It was always. She took a breath. "Yes, it is what I want, but I do not want you want it and you want me," he said. "Yes," she said very quietly. He turned it over, not frantically. He took his time because it deserved his time and because he was a man who did not make quick decisions under pressure. "Are there horses at the clan camp?" he asked. She stared at him. "The clan has horses," he said. 60 people means probably 20 or 30 horses, and a winter camp needs a farrier as much as a garrison does." He met her eyes. "More, actually, because a garrison can send for one. A mountain camp can't." "Calvin," she said, "I would have to negotiate a partial posting. Garrison contract through spring, then—" "Calvin." She crossed the distance between them and put her hands on his face, tilting his head up to look at her directly, and her eyes were dark and very close. "You would leave the garrison posting." "The garrison has 3 other smiths," he said. "The Ashwalker winter camp has none, and the war leader needs a home base." He covered her hands with his. "And I need her." "I need you," she said. "Then this is not actually a problem," he said. She kissed him with the particular intensity of someone who has been afraid for a day and is now not afraid anymore, and he kissed her back, and the horse between them stamped with mild impatience, and across the garrison yard the gate guard very deliberately looked at the sky. He presented the arrangement to Ashbourne the following morning. Ashbourne listened, looked at the ceiling as though doing arithmetic, and said, "I can keep you on a half-retainer for garrison consultation. If Ashwalker clan has horses that occasionally need campaign preparation, I am sure that falls under the scope of regional farrier services." A pause. "The garrison will manage." "Thank you, Lieutenant," he said. "The Ashwalker war leader has been useful to this command," Ashbourne said, as though he had not spoken. "Keeping her well-resourced and well-placed is strategically important. Another pause, and something in her expression shifted just slightly toward something human and warm before she put it away. "Go to your work, Fletcher." He went and did his work. The transition happened over the first months of the new year, as the winter began to soften and the passes cleared enough for real travel. Calvin negotiated his arrangement with the garrison, packed his tools, organized the transfer of Ironwood's care to the garrison's secondary smith with a detailed set of written instructions about the right side approach, and prepared to move his operations to higher ground. The Ashwalker clan received him without ceremony and without coldness. He had been assessed. He had been named. He was Mazoga's Karathu, and the clan treated that as the straightforward fact it was. He set up a proper farrier's corner at the edge of the clan camp, a travel forge and a stone-built anvil stand, and spent the first week reshoeing every horse in the clan's string. Clan members brought him horses and watched him work with the specific attention of people who valued horses, and he felt them deciding their opinions of him with each shoe, each careful examination, each animal that left his hands better than it arrived. Elder Shareth brought him her own horse, an elderly gray mare with brittle hooves, and stood and watched him work on her for an hour without comment, and when he finished she said, "You talk to them." "Yes," he said. "What do you say?" "Things specific," he said. "Just sounds to let them know I'm there and that there's nothing to worry about." Shareth looked at the mare, who was resting a hip now with the absolute relaxation of an animal that has been properly attended to. "She has not been that calm with a farrier in years," Shareth said. "She was worried about her feet," Calvin said. "They hurt, now they don't as much. She's relieved." Shareth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You see them, animals, you see what they feel." "I try to." Another quiet moment. Then she said, "Come and eat with us at the central fire tonight." And she walked away, and he understood that to be the clan's version of full acceptance. He came to the central fire that night with Mazoga, who walked into the gathering with the particular authority she wore differently now, larger, the war leader's mantle settling on her shoulders like it had always belonged there. The clan made room for both of them, which was the best thing he had seen in years. Mazoga led the Ashwalker clan with a combination of discipline and care that Calvin watched with unabashed admiration. She was direct and unsparing with hard decisions and patient with the people who needed patience, and she was never cruel. She maintained the intelligence relationship with Thorngate through the spring, which kept the borderland quiet and earned the clan a reputation for reliability that had strategic value. Rashka, recovered somewhat but stepping back for real now, watched Mazoga command and did not interfere, which told Calvin that whatever the elder thought of the succession, she had made her peace with it. There was a moment in the late spring that Calvin would carry with him for years. The clan was doing a horse assessment, a seasonal review of the string. All the animals walked and jogged and examined, and Mazoga was overseeing it from the edge of the paddock, making notes in the simple notation system her clan used. Calvin was doing the hoof examinations. They were working together in the way that had become completely natural to them. She called each horse forward, he examined, they discussed, she marked. Rashka was watching from a distance. After a while, Rashka came to stand beside Elder Shareth, who was also watching. Calvin could not hear what they said, but he saw Shareth gesture, a gesture that took in both him and Mazoga working in the paddock, and he saw Rashka nod, and whatever passed between them looked like something settled and decided and good. In the early summer, Mazoga came back from a patrol of the southern range and found him at the forge in the late evening and stood for a moment watching him work. "What is it?" he asked, not looking up. "Nothing is wrong," she said. "That's not what I asked." He heard her move, and she sat on the stone edge of the forge stand, elbows on her knees, close enough that her shoulder was almost against his arm. He kept working a hinge pin for one of the elder tents, a small job, and let her be quiet until she was ready. "I was thinking," she said, "about the night I first walked into that camp. The perimeter stake night," he said. "Yes, I was watching the sentry gap for 20 minutes before I moved, and she paused. "I was frightened. I do not show it, so perhaps you did not know, but I was frightened, not of your soldiers. Of what it would cost me to ask for anything from humans after she stopped. After everything. He set the hinge pin aside and turned to face her. And then you walked over, she said, with your hammer because you had forgotten you were holding it. The corner of her mouth moved. And you were so ordinary, not small. I do not mean small, I mean human, concerned in a human way, not afraid of me, not performing, not being afraid, just not. You're not frightening, he said. I am to most people. To most people, sure, not to me. She looked at him. Why not? He thought about it genuinely, because she asked things genuinely and deserved genuine answers. I have shod war horses that could kill me in 3 moves, he said. Big animals, unpredictable ones, animals that have been hurt and are afraid. You learn pretty quickly that the size of a thing has nothing to do with whether it means you harm. And you can feel it when something means you harm. It's different. It feels different. You felt, he searched for it. Safe, he said. You felt safe, which sounds strange given that you're armed. She looked at him for a long moment. I am armed, she agreed. And you've never once made me feel unsafe, he said. She reached out and touched his jaw. He leaned into it. The bedroll, she said, almost to herself. The bedroll, he agreed. Such a small thing, she said. No, he said, not a small thing. You know it wasn't. Her hand came down from his face and found his. She held it. They sat at the forge in the long summer evening, the sound of the clan camp around them, fire and voices, and someone somewhere playing a stringed instrument he did not know the name of, and Calvin Fletcher felt the particular fullness of a man who has stopped waiting for his life to begin. I want to do something, Mazoga said. All right, he said. There is a custom, she said carefully, among my people. It is not formal, not like a ceremony. It is private. She paused. A mark. If both people agree to it. A clan marking, not the war leader's marks. Those are different, but a personal one. One that says I am his and he is mine in a language that does not require words. He looked at her arm where the clan tooling on her leather bodice echoed, and at the markings on Rashka's forearms, and at the scrolling pattern on Mazoga's own forearms that he had never asked about because he had been waiting for her to explain them in her own time. A mark, he said. On the wrist, she said. A small thing. You would be marked as mine and I as yours. It is done in pairs. I would mark you and then you would mark me. She paused. But you would have to do it yourself. The second half. I cannot mark myself. It is part of the custom. You would have to be willing to try. He looked at her. The evening light was making copper of the birch leaves and amber of her face. Show me the design, he said. She produced a small piece of birch bark from her vest pocket on which she had already sketched the interlocking pattern, 2 lines that wound around each other, clean and deliberate like water and river grass, small enough to sit on the inner wrist. He studied it. I will not be as precise as you, he said honestly. That is the point, she said. The imprecision is yours, it makes it ours. He looked up at her. Yes, he said. She smiled. It was the biggest, realest smile he had ever seen from her. And it did something to his heart that was probably dangerous, and that he had no intention of protecting himself from. They did it together in the privacy of his tent, later that evening, with the small needle tool she had brought for the purpose and the ink that smelled of pine resin and something else he could not identify. She was skilled and careful, and his wrist stung in a way that was much less unpleasant than he'd expected, because he was watching her face while she worked rather than the needle. Then he did hers, slower and less precise, and with several stops to breathe and check his line. And she held completely still the entire time in the way that he now recognized as her truest form of gentleness, stillness, offered to something she wanted to protect. When it was done, they held their wrists together, the marks side by side, hers clean and exact, his a little rough and earnest, and they matched perfectly. Karathu, she said quietly. Karathu Mazoga Ashwalker, he said. She kissed him slowly and thoroughly, and outside the tent the summer evening continued, full of fire and voices and the sound of horses resting, and he thought, this is it. This is the life. The summer turned, and the autumn came back around. A full year since the night she had first walked into the firelight at the cavalry camp perimeter with 2 spears pointed at her, and something unfinished and enormous behind her eyes. The borderlands had been quiet all year, the Asheville raiding parties broken up and leaderless without Goreth Stoneback's eastern flank command structure, the Thornwall cavalry maintaining the line without the desperation of the previous autumn. Calvin made his scheduled garrison visits, 3 days in Thorngate every 6 weeks, which was enough to keep the contract alive, and the garrison horses sound and Ashbourne updated on whatever Mazoga wanted her updated on. He always came back from those visits to find that the clan camp felt like returning home, which was something he had not felt since Redvale, before he was old enough to know that Redvale was too small for him. Ironwood the bay stallion had a protege at the clan camp now, a young horse, dark brown with a white star, that one of the clan families had brought back from a trade run. The horse was nervous and had a history Calvin was reconstructing from her behavior. He had been working with her for 6 weeks, and she had started to look for him in the mornings, which was a very good sign. Mazoga came to watch him with the young mare one morning and leaned on the paddock rail with her arms folded. 2 more weeks, he said. You said that last week. She's slower than the stallion was, he said, but she's getting there. She watches you, Mazoga observed, even when you are not near her. She tracks you. She's deciding I'm reliable, he said. He looked up at Mazoga and she was looking at him with the unguarded expression he had learned to recognize as her most honest face, the one she kept for him. You tracked me too, he said, before you came in. I did, she agreed with no embarrassment. 3 nights, he said. 3 nights, she agreed. And then you left the bedroll, she tilted her head. I have thought about that so many times, what you knew without my telling you. That I was cold and would not ask. You were not going to ask, he said. No, she said. I never ask, I have, she paused. I have always managed alone. I know, he said. That's why it mattered. You didn't have to manage it alone, that's all. She looked at him for a long moment. The young mare had crossed the paddock to stand near Calvin's shoulder, drawn by his stillness. You have never once, Mazoga said, made me feel like a burden or a novelty or something strange that requires handling, a pause. You have made me feel seen exactly as I am. That's the point, he said quietly. Karathu, she said. He crossed the paddock and came to the rail, and she leaned down from it and kissed him, easy and certain, and the young mare breathed warm air on the back of his neck. The winter they were in was cold and clear and full. The work was real and continuous and satisfying shoes and hooves and iron and fire by day, and Mazoga across the hearth by night, the sounds of the clan camp outside, the particular quiet of a border country that had decided, at least for this stretch of time, to let itself be at peace. He wrote a letter to the smith in Redville who had taken him on as an apprentice at 14. The first letter he had written in years, a small honest letter about where he had landed and who he had found there. He was not sentimental about it. He did not say everything. He just said that he had a posting and a home and a person who had walked into a camp and seen him at the edge of a fire, and that he was glad for all of it. Mazoga read the letter over his shoulder without asking permission, which was her way, and when she finished she said, You called me a person. You are a person, he said. You did not say orc. Why would I? She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she picked up the letter and wrote something at the bottom in her own hand, in the common tongue. He has found his home, and so have I. Then she set it down for him to fold and seal. He looked at what she had written for a long time. Then he folded the letter and sealed it, and he held out his hand, and she took it, and the fire was warm and the horses were quiet in the paddock outside, and the camp was alive around them with voices and work, and the particular thick warmth of people who are exactly where they should be. 1 more year like this, Mazoga said, and even Vance will have run out of opinions. Calvin laughed a real laugh, the kind that comes from the chest, and she looked at him with the expression that was still the best thing he had ever seen. Open, warm, certain, choosing him, choosing this, choosing it every day. He squeezed her hand. She squeezed back. Outside, Ironwood's successor, the young mare, still learning, still deciding the world was safe, put her head over the paddock fence and watched the two of them through the tent opening with her big, thoughtful eyes, and then went back to her hay, satisfied with what she had seen. The fire burned down and they let it, because there was wood for morning and the room held its warmth, and there was nowhere else either of them was going. This was not the end of any story worth telling. It was just the part of the story where everything was exactly as it should be, finally and completely, and they both knew it, and they held onto it together in the uncomplicated and unshakable way of people who have earned it.